Hey everyone, I'm Davis Toney. I'm the owner of Prosper Management Group. Let's talk about the number one question, maybe the number two question. Number one is usually what's your pricing? The number two question, but number one today is should I sell my house or should I rent it out? It's a great question, makes a ton of sense, especially with rates where they were a few years ago. We talked to a lot of owners who probably never planned on being a landlord, but when they look at the financials, they start to go, hey, this may make a lot of sense for us to do. So, great question. Before we dive in, a few disclaimers. One, this is not financial advice. Number two, this is not legal advice. And then number three, I have to acknowledge the obvious. You're listening to a property manager talk about whether you should sell or you should rent out your house. So I have a little bit of a bias. Now, it comes from every day talking to people who have seen their lives change, generations of lives change by wealth from the real estate market and rentals in particular. So I have to acknowledge the bias. I will say by the end of this video, you're going to get a good idea of whether or not that you should sell or you should rent. I am 100% certain that there are cases in which it absolutely makes the most sense to sell. And so if you're curious, if you want to have a one-on-one conversation, I'll be sure to give you an honest opinion. And for a lot of folks, that may be me telling you, hey, you should sell this. Okay. So let's talk about the real question that you want to know. Should I rent or should I sell? Usually when we walk through this conversation, there's a few kind of maybe categories of questions that we want to ask. And I think for your time's sake, it may make the most sense to start with, do you even qualify to rent your property out? And so what do I mean by that? For some folks, we may not get to the second half of this conversation because very early on in these questions at the beginning, you may find that it doesn't make sense. And for starters, we look at your circumstances. For a lot of folks, you need cash right now to do that next thing that you want to do. If you're watching this video, you're thinking of selling, which means you're probably going somewhere. Maybe you are, let's say, buying a house because your family's growing and you need the cash from this property to even do that, right? Or maybe you have a large expense coming up and you need the cash from that property to be able to pay that expense. And so if that's you, might answer your question 1 minute into this video. I'm a fan of trying to make it work where we can. If we have a great asset, which is what we'll talk about in this video further on, if we have a great asset and we can make the numbers work, and we can walk through that process of analyzing that property, then I'm a fan of making it work and trying to keep that property. But in a lot of cases, you may say, hey, I have to have the cash. It is what it is. So that's kind of obviously a qualifier for should you even continue on in this video. Now, if you don't need the cash right now, right away maybe, you get to move on to the next question, which is, do you have more cash set aside to successfully own a rental property? So what do I mean by this? Well, to be frank, things go wrong and things break. So if you don't have money or reserves set aside to handle these things as they come up, if they were to come up early on in your process, I'm hoping they don't, but let's say they do, can you handle them? We talk with a lot of folks who start this process with a really, really tight budget. They're not sure, they thought about selling, they think about renting, and they go the rental route, but it's gonna be tight. And 2 months in, the HVAC goes down, and they don't have the money set aside to handle that type of emergency. And so if you're in that position, one question I usually ask when I'm speaking with an owner who's thinking through should they rent the property out, just say, hey, how long can the property sit vacant before you really get nervous? You start thinking, oh crap, what have we done? Why do I ask that? It's not because I think it's going to sit for a long time. Charleston inventory moves pretty quick, but it's a good indicator of whether or not you have the reserves to cover when things don't go according to plan. If you were to get it rented right off the bat, but the AC breaks 2 months in, do you have the funds to fix it, right? So things can go wrong, appliances can break, pipes can leak, and unexpected things are inevitable when it comes to owning a rental property. And so you just need to know ahead of time that you need to have the funds set aside for something like that. Now, of course, as we go through a property, or maybe as you self-manage, you can do this, but if you work with a property manager, they should be setting aside funds as you go, or recommending you set aside funds as you go to handle things like that as they come up. But if it was to happen early on in the process, you want to make sure you have some funds that you can tackle those problems as they come about. Another big topic when it comes to kind of having funds at the outset is this idea of getting a property rent ready. And so what we mean by rent ready is kind of in the name is there's usually some work, it may not be a lot, but there's some work to get that property ready for the market. If you're curious about an example of what it may look like to be rent ready, we actually list our rent ready standards on our website. I'll post a link in the blog under this video or in the description. Take a look at that. It just gives you an idea. But when it comes to rent ready, it's really the idea of getting the property up to code and then getting it really ready up to rent ready standards of what is an A+ tenant going to be looking for in a property, right? It can't have holes in the wall. It can't have bulbs that have been burned out for 2 years, right? From a code side of things, it may be we need to have smoke detectors in there. We need to have carbon monoxide detectors in there. Things like that. I think when you've owned a house for a while, I know for myself, you maybe overlook things that have been going on in your house that you just didn't notice, right? You didn't notice that the smoke detector's batteries have been dead for the last year, but when it comes time to rent that out with liability that comes along with it, we want to make sure that that gets taken care of. You may not have cared that the blinds for this window or broken or not working, right? Things like that, just getting the property rent ready. You need to have some cash set aside to tackle those things. Again, they may be small, they may be big, depending on the property or how long it's been occupied or whatnot, but you need to have some cash set aside to get that property rent ready. And again, that's what a property manager should walk through with you. All right, so we don't need the cash right away from selling the property if we sell the property, and we have some cash set aside in case of an emergency and to get the property rent ready. The next question we get into is usually what folks really want to get into. It's probably the whole reason you're even watching this video. Can the property cash flow? Can I make money off this property, right? And so if I'm not going to make money off of it, why even do it, right? And so that's probably how some people are approaching it. So how do we look at this? First question I'm usually going to ask you is, what's your monthly payment, right? Or nowadays, a lot of times what I'm asking is, what's your interest rate? Then we're going to turn around and look at what the property can rent for. And so for a lot of folks, this is usually when the conversation might turn from scary and intimidating around rent ready and whatnot to pretty exciting, because you may find that, hey, I've got a low interest rate. My monthly is this, and I'm going to turn around and be able to rent it for this. And you start seeing dollar signs, right? And in a lot of cases, that is the case. In a lot of cases, that's not the case. And so that's where really knowing ahead of time, and a good property manager should be able to give you guidance on what it should rent for, what it could rent for. That's where you can start to get a better idea around that cash flow, right? When I talk to someone and they have a really low interest rate, I have to make sure that they understand the full ramification of that interest rate, right? I mean, we're talking to people who have 2.5% interest rates on 30-year loans. And so a monthly payment or a low interest rate like that, it starts to paint a picture of the cash flow that we can make or how quickly you might be able to start making money. Now, having said that, a quick thought there, and we're going to come back to this fully in a video actually next week, but cash flow isn't the only ROI to consider when you come to thinking about renting out a property. So yes, there's cash flow and cash rules everything, right? But you're also paying down debt. Depending on where your property is and if the market's moving that way, your property can appreciate. And then also there tends to be tax benefits that come along with owning an investment property. And so when we talk with someone who has a lower monthly payment, we can say, hey, you're winning in all 4 categories, right? Cash flow, debt, appreciation, tax. But a lot of times we might find someone who's making a little bit of cash flow or even breaking even right now. A lot of investors are just trying to break even on cash flow because of all the other benefits that they can have by owning real estate. So I'd imagine for most folks, that's the question that you're really struggling with, or that's the main topic that you have on top of your mind is, can we make money off of this from our rental rate? If you want to know what your rental rate could be, if you want to have a conversation about this, reach out to us. We're happy to help. We'll do an estimate. It's free, no strings attached. We'll get that information over to you, and then we can answer any questions that you have about it. So I guess maybe one small additional thought when it comes to that idea of rent range or what the property can rent for. I also usually just want to give a quick thought in the back of someone's head. It's also important to zoom out, right? Or maybe depending on how you look at it, zoom in. If we talk to someone and we say, hey, it's not going to cash flow a ton in that property, but we feel strongly that the market is kind of moving that way, or you're in a very desirable area of town that in time, this equation will look very different. That's something that you should keep in mind. That's something that a real estate agent can probably help you with. A property manager can probably help you with. And so you may hear a rental rate today and think one thing, but we want to help you zoom out and you may see a different thing. And with a little bit of patience, you may have a really special property on your hands. So we don't need cash right away from selling. We have some cash to handle emergencies and getting the property rent ready. And we think that the property can cash flow. We're comfortable with the cash flow. This is one where we're now starting to get away maybe from the financial conversation of selling versus renting, maybe away from the on paper factors of selling versus renting. And now we're going to turn to kind of the mental and emotional side of being a landlord. And so my next question, when I'm talking through with folks who are considering, especially doing this for the first time, is can you handle being a landlord emotionally, mentally? Being a landlord comes with a lot of responsibilities. It comes with a lot of challenges. And as we've said a few times, it comes with a lot of up and downs. So are you prepared mentally to manage a rental property? This is especially true for folks who are going to self-manage. And so a different way that I put it to try to help get that frame of mind set is, are you able to view owning a rental property the same way you might own or run a business? Because that's what it is. If it doesn't produce the way it needs to produce, you can lose it. It can close down, just like a business. And so are you able to step back and make an unemotional decision when the decision feels very emotional? At some point in your landlord life, you're going to have a tenant issue that's going to require a really hard conversation. At some point in your landlord life, you're going to have a vendor who messes something up. And again, you're going to have a really hard conversation. At some point in your landlord life, you're going to have an expense that you didn't plan for, and it's going to squeeze you, right? This is the point where people usually think I'm trying to convince them not to rent out their house. Again, I've seen how rental properties can change people's lives for families and for generations to come. I just don't want you to be unaware of the emotional toll that self-managing or that a rental property can have on you. And so you just need to be prepared for those conversations, for those challenges, and make the decision ahead of time. Am I ready? Is that in my skill set? Is that in my strengths maybe of being able to have those conversations, deal with the stress of that? And so if you're not, this is further down on our list because it doesn't necessarily dictate yes or no, you should sell or you should rent. What it really does is it just tells you ahead of time, hey, this may be where I need someone to fill in for me or supplement my strengths, right, of owning this property or maybe self-managing this property. This is where I might need some help, right? We deal with a lot of landlords who say, hey, I don't need the cash right away. I have the cash set aside to handle emergencies, but I just don't want to deal with all of the emotionalness that can come with owning a property and being a landlord, and that's what I want you to handle. You may check all the other boxes, but feel like having someone to handle the hard conversations, to deal with maybe the project management of maintenance and the ups and downs of that, where you just get to kind of enjoy your life and let the property run and let someone run it for you. That's where a great property manager can come in and take that off your plate. And so that's something, food for thought. If you want to have a question around that, definitely let us know. We're happy to have that conversation further. Moving on from that, we have one last idea just to keep in the back of your mind. It's maybe one thought just to drop on you at the end. You should also consider the tax implications, right? And so in Charleston, for example, primary residences get a homestead tax break. It can significantly reduce taxes. Secondary homes, however, pay higher taxes typically, right? And so renting out your property means it's no longer your primary residence. So you lose that homestead exemption and ultimately likely pay higher taxes. And it's something that should factor into your decision when making that choice, right? Additional cost into your decision. On the flip side, as we've mentioned a few times, there are tax benefits to owning a rental property. So I don't think this necessarily says, if you've made it this far down the list and you're still wondering, this shouldn't send you one way or another. This is just something to keep in the back of your mind saying, hey, I need to remember the tax implications now of not getting that homestead tax break. And we can walk through that, and you have the ability in Charleston to kind of estimate what you think it may be. But I always mention this topic because we talk to folks all the time who decide to rent, and then they get to that point in the year where that tax bill comes, or maybe they pay it every month, and they go, whoa, what happened? What changed? And so this is where you should know ahead of time. And again, a property manager should walk you through this, should have the conversation with you and give you a good idea of maybe what you can expect from a tax standpoint. So that's generally the conversation I'm having with people who are considering, should I rent it out or should I sell it? And so if I could summarize it again, maybe in 30 seconds, it's one, are you financially in a position to rent out? Do you need the cash? Do you have cash set aside to handle the things that can come with being a landlord? Two, is your property worth renting out, right? Is it going to cash flow? Is it something that people want to live in? Is it desirable? Is it maybe in an area that's becoming more desirable and the market's moving? And then number three, are you mentally prepared for being a landlord, right? If you're not, are you mentally prepared to hand that off to someone? Are you prepared for them to handle it for you? If you can say yes to all three of those, you've probably found your answer on whether or not renting makes sense for you. I would again say, hey, take the time, evaluate each of these kind of questions and sections pretty carefully. If you have questions about it, reach out to us, Prosper Management Group. We're happy to help, and we'd love to hear from you and have this conversation. We want families in our area to thrive and prosper. So thanks for watching. Best of luck with your decision. Thanks.